Good Thursday morning. Here we are for Can You Relate? And I am with a good friend of mine, Pastor David Keener. He is in Georgia. David and I have known each other for quite a few years, actually.
A long time.
And what I love about Pastor Dave is that he is wonderful when it comes to mission. And so lots of cool insight that he brings to our conversation, hopefully, especially for this conversation. So today's character is Judah. It's a lesser-known character. It's one of the 12 sons of Jacob, as we've been talking about the last few days. Judah is the fourth son of Leah. So if you look at the lineage of Leah, her four sons, she's the baby he's the baby according to her bloodline. Judah also becomes the tribe of Judah, right? So this becomes the most successful, the most powerful of all of the 12 tribes of Israel. It's in the southern part of Bethlehem, and it plays an important role in the narration of who Christ is and how Christ moves about the territories as he walks in this world. Judah, his name means thanksgiving and praise. That's what Leah said in Genesis 29:35. It says, "This time I will praise the Lord." It's kind of a fascinating thing if you think about Judah's name and what she intended for it and what his life actually looks like. We first really meet Judah in the story of the brothers selling Joseph into slavery. Of course, their intention is that they're going to kill him, right? That's what they want. And it's actually Judah that changes the course. Reuben first intervenes, but then Judah, as Joseph is down in the pit, Judah says, "What profit is it for us if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Let us not our hand be upon him, our brother, our flesh." So Judah really is the one who steps in and changes the trajectory of Joseph being killed by his brothers and now being sold into slavery. That's his suggestion. So he kind of backs up Reuben in his attempt to save Joseph, but has a different twist on what that looks like. So if we follow the story of Judah a little further, we learn that Judah then gets married. He fathers three sons. His first son, marries Tamar, and is actually smited, I guess is the term we would use, right? He is destroyed by God. And then the second son is, by rights, supposed to marry Tamar and father children for her because she's a widow, and he refuses to do so, and so God kind of puts an end to him too. And Judah's wife protects the third son because he's too young to father children at this point. And there's kind of this weird story of Tamar down the road dressing as a prostitute and actually allowing Judah to father children within her. He thinks that he's just having a little fun with the prostitute. She comes back. He hears that there's a rumor that Tamar, the widow, has had relations outside of the natural course within his sons. He's ready to do an honor killing. She says, actually, it's your kids. She returns his cord and his staff. Those are the things that he paid the prostitute to have relations with her. And Judah then accepts these two children. They're two babies, male babies, twins, born at the same time. What's kind of really fascinating about that really insignificant story is that Perez, the first baby that comes from Tamar, fathered by Judah, is actually named in the lineage of Jesus. If you turn to Matthew 1, you will see Perez named, and so that comes out of that story. Finally, the last thing we know about Judah is that when Joseph is exalted to his position of authority during this famine in Egypt, and he now holds Benjamin as a prisoner, it is Judah that offers himself to be the bond, to be the security to release Benjamin. And of course, in the twist of all of that, it's that moment that Joseph reveals his true identity and they bring forth reconciliation. So even though Judah is an insignificant character in the larger narrative, really, he plays a couple pretty important roles in how God's at work. So, Dave, what do you think about all that?
Well, I was kind of hoping for an easier story.
You and Scott both, but
yeah,
sorry.
I was hoping it would be, one of the nice ones, Psalm 23 or something. That would be a great one. But I guess I can relate. Judah is a flawed human being, and God used him in wonderful ways. Something in my history which you don't know is I was diagnosed as borderline mentally retarded when I was in 5th grade.
Really?
Yes, I was. I had lots and lots of learning disabilities, things like that. When I was in elementary school, they didn't have special education, things like that. They just put a label on you, and they pushed you aside. And they told my parents, don't expect much from him. He's just kind of special, so I didn't expect much for myself. So I went all through elementary school, high school, barely graduated from high school, almost flunked out of high school. But got out and discovered that it was easier to get into college than it was to get into a union. And so I tried for years to get into a union. Went to college and ended up being a straight A honor student in college, and discovered that maybe my IQ was a little bit higher than what they had told my parents when I was in 5th grade. But the point of this story is I'm having my 50th high school reunion this year, and whenever I go back home, they all say the same thing to me. How did you become a pastor? Of all the people we ever knew, you are the last one we would expect, because they knew me, and I was a little bit wild. But I just tell them, God works in wonderful ways. He works through flawed human beings. He works through people that maybe have no confidence in themselves. I had very, very little confidence growing up in that. And I kind of see Judah in the same thing. Judah kind of knows what's right to do. He knows we really shouldn't be killing Joseph. But he's not strong enough at that point to stand up and just say, no, this is wrong. So he tries to find a loophole. And later on, he knows that he has this obligation with Tamar to continue that line through his son. But, he hedges again. Once again, he hedges. But as you get older and you get wiser, then all of a sudden you begin to realize how flawed of a human being you are, and how God has taken this flawed human being. He's done wonderful things. He's given you wonderful opportunities. And so the story's kind of neat that at the end, he becomes a humble man. And he says, no, take me instead of Benjamin. I'm at the end of my life. I've lived it. God has been good to me, and I have nothing left to fear from this. So it's kind of an interesting journey of someone who started out bitter as a brother and said, the world's against me. Why? How come everybody else gets the good stuff and I don't? I had a lot of those thoughts when I was in school. How come everybody else, gets to do these things and I don't get to do them? But later on, he looks back and says, I was greatly blessed and is humbled before God. So yeah, I guess I can relate.
That's a pretty profound, that's a great story. And as long as I've known you, I've always thought you're pretty smart, actually. So that's amazing.
I'm a good actor.
Yeah. Very faithful, maybe. But you know what? I think that's also a great question for you. In your life, as you're listening to this devotion, as you're thinking about Dave's story compared to your story, I hope they're not the same. That's a pretty unique story, I hope.
Not the same.
But God's still using you, right? God still has a purpose for you, and God is elevating you to something, developing you, shaping you, preparing you. And it's kind of exciting to think about what that looks like.
Yeah, and don't let other people define who you are. That's what I did for the first 18 years of my life. I let everybody else tell me what I was, and then when I put my life into God's hands, he showed me that I could be so much more as long as he was walking with me.
That's a pretty great message. Thanks a lot, Dave. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for asking me.
Have a great Thursday.
Bye.